for my teammates, for my employees, for my boss, in how I speak with them, how I deal with them, how I have conflict with them, is a reflection on my character. And so I try to instill that conflict is a character position for me, and how to have it and deal with it and negotiate it is revealing your values, your sense of purpose, and what you're looking for as an individual or person part of a team.
Welcome to Organized Chaos, the show about all things organizations. On today's episode, we're going to wrap up our discussion on the new workplace, redefining culture, collaboration, and performance. Still with me today, and still the founder and principal consultant of Coaching Imperative, Dr. Isaac Carter. And still, yes, clap it up for Isaac. And still with me today, haven't scared her off yet. She is the retired professor of human behavior at the University of Southern California, the founder of We Will Inc., the recently retired Dr. Laree Kiely. Clap it up. Thank you. Again, thank you both for continuing this discussion with us. We really appreciate it. In the previous episode, we talked about conflict. And some of the contributing factors to increased conflict, but I thought we might spend some time talking about just generally the types of conflict that you're seeing with your clients. I'm happy to discuss some of the conflict that I'm seeing in practice, but really if we can maybe have a broader discussion about sort of the deleterious effect that conflict has on an organization and the achievement of its mission. So I'll just sort of frame this up by saying, we sort of live in a world, we touched on this in the first episode, we live in a world that I like to call sort of like bumper sticker values, right? Where your whole life philosophy has to be summed up on a bumper sticker that is like on your car, which I never really fully understood because there's no way I'm putting a bumper sticker on my car. But your whole life philosophy summarized on one card, one bumper sticker, and I think about sometimes like how that even contributes to conflict, right? Because it says something without saying anything. And in this environment where we have a multi-generational workforce, teamwork and collaboration, highly prevalent part of organizational life, it can be pretty challenging to work with someone whose bumper sticker that you don't like. And so I think, like I do so many times, about sort of what the implications of this are on organizations, on the organizational experience, on leadership as you are structuring teams, etc. So I'm just wondering, sort of from you two, what do you think about that, and what are you seeing in terms of conflict, and how are you advising your clients with respect to how to resolve conflict?
Isaac, you want to go first?
Yeah, sure. For me, I'm going to put it in a couple of buckets that were very instrumental in how I see conflict. One is my parents were both human service professionals. So I was taught at a young age how to have conflict, if you will. It wasn't necessarily intentional, but just to be comfortable with disagreeing or articulating your point. You might not win this argument, son, but I want to hear you out and why you should stay out past curfew and why that's important, and tell you no, and no is okay as a solution. So I think oftentimes with conflict, people have a decision they want, the outcome they want, and they get very frustrated if the conflict is not leading to that outcome. I think the second part about it is that people personalize conflict, that the conflict is not the issue we're discussing, but it is about me and you, who we are, our character, our being. And sometimes we step into conflict where people are personalizing things, and our language might contribute to that. And so one of the reasons I got involved in emotional intelligence and cultural intelligence was to help people be better able to navigate conflict and look at it as an opportunity and leverage it as a creative tension or as an opportunity for growth. And then the RA in me, for those with the residence halls and live on campus, confrontation is not what I deal with. I deal with carefrontation. So how do I actually care for my teammates, for my employees, for my boss, in how I speak with them, how I deal with them, how I have conflict with them, is a reflection on my character. And so I try to instill that conflict is a character position for me, and how to have it and deal with it and negotiate it is revealing your values, your sense of purpose, and what you're looking for as an individual or person part of a team.
Beautiful.
Tell
As
Laree wants to
always,
get in here.
so eloquent. I wish so we're going to capture this. This is good. Very nice. Very nice. And tell your parents, good job.
Terry
I,
Yolanda.
I spent, I think most of my work around leadership really sort of involves decision making its own, but it really involves interaction. And it's how people interact with information and how they interact with each other. And I pull out conflict kind of as a specific issue. For me, conflict, disagreement, I think, is a good thing. We were supposed to be able to do that. Our founding father, John Adams, said, if you only have two parties, we will be forever polarized. So it's okay to, we're supposed to be okay to disagree, but it's also supposed to be a higher level where we can then find some common ground where we can move forward. And I don't mean compromise, I mean an actual solution that we both feel good about. And I've trained mediators for decades, and I am a licensed mediator. There are very few licensed ones. And it's just amazing to me how people can do exactly what you said, Isaac. It starts getting personal, and it isn't even about the issue anymore. And so one of the things that I found about conflict, and I may be wrong, but every single solitary conflict I have ever seen has at its root, whether it's two little kids fighting with each other, two countries fighting with each other, two parties fighting against with one another, at its root is always, always who gets to tell who what to do. You know? And
Yeah.
so that automatically assumes that if we're in conflict, then one of us is going to have to win and one of us is going to have to lose. And nobody I have ever met, and I work in communist countries, nobody I've ever met wants to be told what to do.
That's the truth.
We want to have some say in it. But when you've got to have a winner and a loser, then you've got conflict. And what happens there, and it gets personal, and then it gets mean, and then it gets angry, and then it gets destructive, and then it damages relationships. And when it damages relationships, they are almost always permanently damaged. And then when people have to run into each other, like in the workplace, and they've had one meeting. I mean, I've had Jeremy's seen me teach to different departments, and some departments actually inherit conflict from something that happened 20 years ago.
Yeah.
Right? And I don't like you either. And I was really mad. And it happened in a meeting 20 years ago where somebody said something that really pissed me off. It's like, wow, human beings are a trip. But conflict it can be avoided as long as we learn how to disagree productively. And I think that's the trick is can we figure this out? It's like I like apples and you like oranges, but we can't get along unless you like apples too. And I'm not going to give it up until you're an apple liker. It's just,
Mhm.
why isn't it okay, as long as we're not harming one another? Why isn't it okay to have differing positions? Now, of course, not harming each other is the key.
Right. Yeah, it's almost like compromise or trying to work through conflict it has sort of become like a dirty word, when really I would argue that I think conflict is sort of just a natural part of every relationship that we have, whether it's coworkers or our spouses or certainly our children. I have conflict, seems like my children every day. But it's like it's a bad thing when really I would argue that I think it should just be considered like just a regular, cost of the freight, like part of doing business.
Mhm.
And
Disagreement.
so
Yeah.
I wonder what maybe if not like tools that you can maybe point folks to or like guidance that you can offer, particularly to leaders trying to navigate and negotiate conflict amongst their teams and inside their organizations. And
You know,
I
so
go?
either of you. Laree, you
Go
have
ahead.
all I feel like you have a tool for everything, so I'm kind of throwing that your way.
Yeah. Well, for coaching, Isaac, you want to go? I'll come after you.
oh, sure. Um, so besides emotional intelligence and learning how to be able to self-regulate, be aware, be socially aware, and be diligent about relationships and understanding culture too, to make sure our motivations are where they need to be, that we're strategic with each other, and taking actions that are leading to mass success or global success, not individual success. Besides that, I think one of the tools that has more recently come into my life is polarity thinking. And polarity thinking and looking at both and solutions and using that in work conflict, I believe, is a valuable tool because it helps you think about the third way. And I think the process of helping people understand polarity thinking gets them to think about, okay, what is good about my position? What's limiting about my position? Okay, what's good about the other person's position? What's limiting? What do we gain? What do we lose? And what can we get if we find a third way that meets us and gets us as a team or group or a leader to a different place? And that process, I think, helps diffuse conflict because it gives people a logical order into how to think about it. And it puts us into a relationship where we're both looking for a third way. You have to get people to submit to polarity thinking, but that's part of your organizational values, part of how you make decisions. It becomes a very valuable tool to help leaders and teams make very good decisions because it helps you with the process and de-escalate the emotion about it and get you really thinking about what the future could be.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, you nailed it. Actually, it's stepping inside the other's shoes,
Mm-hmm.
the ability to do that. So one of the things that I used to give to my executive MBA students is an assignment at the end of their first year. They hated this assignment. And I still hear from them years and years later telling me it was the best thing we ever did, but they hated it. Because what we get into with conflict is we get into debating each other. And debate was never meant for two people to use with one another, ever. It was meant by the ancient Greeks to use when we couldn't resolve it ourselves to take it to a third party, a judge. Never use debate tools with each other. All that does is create relationship damage. But this assignment they had was at the end of the first year, they had to do debates. And they didn't know what side of the debates and we picked some pretty controversial topics, and they didn't know what side they were going to debate until they stood on the stage of the auditorium on campus where we invited all of the other faculty, the students' families, their employees, their employers. I mean, the place was packed with all these major stakeholders in their lives, and they didn't know what they were going to argue until they stood on the stage, because you've got to know all sides of an issue before you can have any kind of positive impact. You're always going to marginalize the impact if we don't look at all of the possibilities. And stepping inside somebody else's reality and having to articulate it is really powerful. And they said, well, even a lawyer knows what side they're going to argue. And I said, yeah, but I'm not training lawyers. I'm training critical thinkers. And I said, and by the way, any lawyer worth their salt is going to know what the other side is going to argue.
True. Yeah.
That's what normal humanity can do. And it doesn't take college education. It doesn't take reading a book. It just takes a mindset of understanding. If I can step into your shoes and you can step into mine, then we can actually figure out that there probably is a lot more common ground than not. And by the
Mm-hmm.
way, to your point about people should do their own personal work first, absolutely. One of the things I do with clients is tell them, let's figure out all your hot buttons. Because once a hot button gets pushed, you're not rational anymore. Let's
Mm-hmm.
figure out what they are and where they came from without going into deep therapy. And just be prepared for the fact that you will not be rational if somebody pushes one of those buttons. Then tell people what your hot buttons are.
Mm-hmm.
And what's
Yeah.
really cool about that is they continue to push them after they know what they are. Now you know what you're dealing with.
I think too, like one of the things I would say that I did in practice when I had people under my team that were in conflict, I would have them take the other person's position.
Right.
Like I won't listen to the conflict until you can articulate the other person's position.
Right.
And that was just an exercise and really just to be thinking critically about what's going on and then lose some of their language that usually when they're first talking about it, it's very easy to describe someone in a certain way. But when you really have to step back and step and take their position, somehow your language tones down and makes it more acceptable to
Ah,
actually handle the conflict.
And I was going to touch on that, Isaac,
ah,
because I remember when I was an undergrad in speech class, they made us take an opposite position, right? Defend a position that was opposite to the one that we truly held. And I always found value of that. I mean, I obviously talk about it all these years later. Like I found that to really like be a valuable experience that really resonated with me. Laree, I feel like you wanted to say something though, so my apologies for cutting you off.
No, no, you didn't. I just agree with both of you so much. I think that this is such an important issue. And even to your point, Jeremy, once people have even tried that once, you can't unring that bell. It actually shifts the mindset. It shifts the way our brain fires, actually. Once you have stepped into somebody else's reality, it changes the synapse firing in our brains almost permanently because you never quite forget, oh yeah, I one time stepped into somebody else's reality and we resolved it. It's very powerful stuff. And what I think I was going to do is just reinforce, Isaac, I absolutely so believe what you said about people have to do their own work first. There's an old thing called attribution theory that said that
Mhm.
I believe that I am three-dimensional and multi-talented and really complex and deep and so on. But you, on the other hand, are only one level. Very simple, and I'm going to give you one word definite description of who you are. I think other people are simple and unidimensional, and we are very complicated. I mean, this is what people get into, and I'm afraid it's getting worse. So I'm
Yeah.
not quite sure if we talk about what do we do with this to try to bring it back to Isaac's point about it's about humanity.
I would love for, as an example, and not to raise politics, but one of the things that frustrates me is that no matter whenever I see a clip of any politician talking, they first describe the other party in some disparaging way, and then they say whatever they have to say. And sometimes I'm like, oh, that's a very good point. But the person that you just talked about is not going to hear that point because all they heard were the blah 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 party or the blah 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 party, and whatever you said went to the Charlie Brown voice and wonka 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 because I just heard how I was insulted. And if we could just say our claims, our evidence in ways that use caring, natural, open language, that we said this is an idea that I'm very passionate about, but I want to hear other point of opinion because that's what's best for our country or our organization or our state. I would love that if we could just get rid of the name calling. Because I don't know if you ever had an argument with your friend or your wife, your partner. Starting out with name calling does not lead to a great discussion.
And it will be a loud one probably too.
Yes, there will be
Or
screaming. Yes.
I can
yeah.
say I tried that, Isaac, that approach, and that did not work well. So yeah. Um, well, and a lot of like what you're describing, right, is so one of the things that I've always been concerned about, right? Like, undoubtedly, we just live in a divided society, and not just politically divided, but really just divided in,
Oh yeah. Oh
pretty
yeah.
much every single way.
Yeah.
And I've always wondered, just as a practitioner, about what was going to happen or how that was going to add so much complexity to organizational life, because I feel like work is probably right. Work and organizational life is one of the last sort of like bastions of working across difference, right? Because outside of work, you can choose your friends, you can choose what you read, you can choose what you do for fun, you can choose everything. But when you go to work, most folks like they don't get to choose who they work with, they
Right.
don't get to choose what they do, etc. And so I just think about like, gosh, that's so challenging, right? And it is puts a lot on organizations and on practitioners, right, to design a workplace experience sort of in this context. And so I guess what I'm asking the group is, yeah, like I mean, I guess what do you think about that? And I mean, because I often I think about this stuff all the time. I'll lay in bed before I go to bed, and I'm just like, gosh, like what about this, or what am I gonna do if this happens, right? And so I'm just like wondering, am I crazy, or do you either of you have any thoughts on any of that? Because I tend to think a lot like Larry. If we don't find a way to solve this, we're screwed, for lack of a
Yeah.
better word.
Yeah. I, I think I live in the middle of something just exactly like that. Without going into too much detail, I live in a co-op, and we are owned by a holding company, right? And we own our houses, but we don't own the grounds. That's collective, and we're owned by a holding company. The holding company a few years ago decided to sell us off. So that meant that we had a whole bunch of people who were very, very different from one another. We've got something like 5 or 6 different decades represented age-wise here, and very different backgrounds and all kinds of stuff. We made great neighbors. Now we are suddenly business partners,
Mm.
and all hell is breaking loose, man. No business expert would have ever recommended that move, but it was a survival move. We had to do it, so we bought it ourselves. And now all these neighbors, neighbors don't always get along anyway, but now we're business partners. It's like, and we're partners. There's no hierarchy. And wow, are the differences surfacing. And the trick is to give people some tools so that they don't turn everything into a fight or everything into a conflict or everything into I'm right and you're wrong and I'm smarter than you. It's really been interesting watching the individual diversity show up here
Mm.
in a not so healthy way on occasion. It's getting better. It's getting a lot better because because we're working on it. But wow. What an experiment! What a lab test this is, and it's. But the sad thing about it is it's predictable. The culture here needs now to actually create an intentional culture, rather than trying to force each of our cultures on everybody else. And
Mhm.
so, what I do in organizations with that is to sit down with people and create an intentional culture rather than defaulting to what each of us already knows but differs from one another. And it's really fun. I did that with my kids. I married into a ready-made family and said we have to create our own rituals and things like that, like to create our own culture. My husband had 2 little girls, and we set all the things. We revisited all the holidays. Which ones do we collectively want to enjoy? Didn't matter what our backgrounds were. What kind of meals did we want to have on these holidays? And they'd say stuff like, well, what did you always? I said, it doesn't matter what I always did. What do you want? What have you always wanted? I mean, Christmas tacos ended up being one of the big things, right? But those Christmas tacos are like the glue that hold us together.
Who doesn't love a good taco?
I
Exactly.
know. But
Even if it's
creating
not
an
Tuesday.
intentional, yeah, yeah, it's taco every day. But building an intentional culture is really important. It's who have we always hoped we could be, not who have we always individually been.
That is the perfect segue to something that I want to
Awesome.
talk about. But before we get there, I want to just say that, yeah, going with the situation that you just described, Laree, is kind of like getting married, like becoming
Oh
business
yeah.
partners with all your neighbors, like
Oh
getting
yeah.
married on a game show where you never even see them. You get maybe like a 3x5 index card and you marry them, and then you go and start life and you sort of like find out how different you are. So
When it's not being televised.
Yeah,
I
exactly.
hopefully.
can't believe people choose partners that way. I mean, really.
You talked about culture, and that was the perfect segue to an area where I wanted to go. So when we talk about increased conflict and a lot of difference in organizations, there's pushing and pulling and pushing back, and there's sort of all that. But then there's also this. As workforces went distributed in response to the pandemic, and now you have folks, some organizations calling folks back to the office, some even getting rid or very severely limiting hybrid days, but under sort of the guise of driving innovation and connection and all those things. Um, what advice, if any, like do you have for organizations as they seek to build cultures that are really resilient, right, and withstand not just like the conflict and all of those things that we previously talked about, but also shifts from maybe a distributed model back to an in-office model, or one where maybe we didn't really talk so much about mental health to where now maybe it's spoken about openly and the like. So I'll throw that to you, Isaac.
Okay.
Actually, yeah,
I was
please.
thinking. I was thinking, but yeah, I'll go.
Oh, you.
No, no, fine. Yeah, I'm fine. Um, there's a couple of things, and I think Laurie hit on this in terms of the scenario she shared about the co-op and people coming together. I think that organizations that are really intentional about their culture help the team or the culture come together by having some shared analysis, some shared community, some shared resources. So it's not just say we should be together, but like, what do I do to facilitate that? So are you having like mindful Mondays? So you start off the week with meditation. Are you doing things like celebrating birthdays and tenure of service in the organization on a regular basis? Are you announcing people when they get promoted or even when they go to another place as celebrations of people's growth and development? I think we have an opportunity to do more communal things together. And the more we do that together, I would call it practice, it makes it easier to actually play together because each of us has a responsibility for our practice. But yeah, we go to practice, but we got to do things to show up. Did we eat right? Did we get our pre-treatment? Did we get taped and ready to go? Or, I grew up having to take piano lessons. So you can't go to the concert on the day and not have practice all week because it's not going to work out that good for you.
Right.
and your parents and your relatives are not going to be happy with you. So it goes back to individual responsibility, but doing some shared activities together, I think, is important and essential for any team, especially now as people are working in different places, have different levels of engagement, finding a way to have where can you pick a spot in your city or your area that you can all come together in a park or as a movie theater. One organization I love around here that one of my clients have had for a long time. They've done sound bath, they've done Top Golf, they've done lip sync, they've done dancing. Like just do things to just celebrate with each other. And that helps. And over the time I'm working with them, you see the level of intimacy they're starting to have in their conversation. You see how they're self-monitoring their conflict with each other. You see how they're going behind you and repairing relationships where at first you had to kind of initiate that. And they're like, oh, we're good now. Dr. Carter, we're good. We got it squared away. We came over to the house. We hate, blah, blah, blah. And that needs to come back. I think the work world as it was facilitated it happening more because we had the water cooler to be around or the copy machine to be around and congregate. And now in this new configuration, we have to create those spaces for each other and start creating some shared language about what we want to see from each other and make that accessible to everybody and make it an ongoing thing versus a thing we just throw out as an attempt to build something, but it has to be ongoing practice.
I feel like Laree is really vibing off what you said. So
I'm vibing with everything he says. Yeah. I want to adopt him.
Okay. I take any elder who want to take me under their wing and help me grow. And let me just say that too. People have to be intentional about wanting to grow.
Yeah. Yeah.
And it's not like a tout anything, but I read an article every day about something. I write them down every day because I had to practice this. I had to compete with ideas. I had to start thinking. I can't just be the same me for my clients based on 5, 10, 12 years ago. I got to constantly be becoming to be good at my job.
I think you're adding to a gift you already had.
Okay. Well, I'll take it that way, but
it just if you're so articulate as well. I mean, I think that is hugely important. The ability to articulate in ways because words matter. Words matter a lot. I was thinking about the question, Jeremy, and for one thing, uh, of course I want to stay home. Why would I want to go into the office? Especially if you're in California. My commute to the office at the university was an hour and 45 minutes one way. I would love to have been able to stay home. I mean, if I have kids, I could stay home. I can wear my jammies to work. I mean, of course, but it boiled down to what people wanted to do as opposed what I want as opposed to what do we need. And my practical answer to this is a job description. And this is the practical answer. There's much more, it's more complex than that. But the very first thing you have to look at about whether or not you're going to have a hybrid workplace or some people will be home and others won't has to do with what the job description is and the criteria for the job description. Does it mean they have to be in the office or for how long? And I think that's really, and by the way, most organizations I know haven't done job descriptions in a while.
yeah.
And you got nothing to stand on if you don't have a job description. You may have to change it and alter it, but you can't not have one. And you can't have one that's, 15 years old. You've got no leg to stand on without a job description.
Laree,
Yeah.
I'm so sorry to cut you off. I think that you sort of just left it. You have nothing to stand on without a job description. That's probably an awesome place to leave it. I'm being told by the producer we need to close, but instead what we will do, I think there's still like a lot of meat on this bone. I will work with you two to have you both back. So we will sort of continue this conversation. And Laree, I feel so bad for having to cut you off. I just want to say that, but my heart's breaking.
My husband would like to learn how to do that as well.
Well, thank you very much, Isaac and Laree, for dedicating your time to this inaugural episode of Organized Chaos. Join us on the next episode where we will talk about leadership do-overs. I will explore key decisions made by leaders where if they had the opportunity, they would maybe make a different decision. We thank you for tuning into Organized Chaos, and we'll catch you next time.